Before we start, don't forget to comment and tell us where you are watching from. The sun had barely risen on that fateful morning, casting a soft orange glow over the small village of Umwahia, yet it felt like the world itself had fallen into an eerie stillness. The air was thick with tension, as though nature itself knew something was about to shatter the peace. In the heart of this quiet village, beneath the worn roof of a humble mud house, a tragedy was unfolding, one that would change the lives of everyone involved forever. Joy sat motionless on the floor, her small hands clasped tightly together in her lap. Her heart was beating so loudly she thought it might burst from her chest. Her eyes were wide, her gaze fixed on the ground as if staring at the dirt beneath her feet would somehow ground her in the reality she was struggling to comprehend. She had always known her family was poor, that they struggled to make ends meet, but today, everything had changed. Today, her life, her very existence, was being sold. Her mother, Uzoamako, paced frantically in the corner, her face streaked with tears. Her father, Chijioke, stood tall and stern by the door, his face set like stone, yet his eyes betrayed him, his guilt, his shame, his anger, all reflected in the hollow look in his eyes. This was not something he had wanted, not something he had imagined. But sometimes, desperation drives people to make decisions that haunt them forever. And today, it had driven him to a point of no return. The negotiation had been swift, as if she were no more than a commodity, a mere pawn in a game where her worth was measured in millions. She had been promised comfort, luxury, and riches beyond her wildest dreams, but none of that mattered now. It didn't matter that the man who had come for her was a billionaire. A man who owned more land than any of them could imagine, who controlled businesses that stretched across continents, a man who could give her anything her heart desired. What mattered now, in this moment of intense clarity, was that her parents had sold her. They had agreed to give her away, to trade her life for a sum of money they had deemed far too valuable to pass up. Uzoamako had whispered to her softly, her voice trembling with the weight of what she was about to say. "Joy, my dear, this is the only way we can survive. We can't afford to live like this anymore. The debts, the hunger, the endless struggle, it's too much for us. But with this money, we can live in peace. We can help your brothers and sisters. You will be taken care of, I promise you." But how could Joy understand? How could she understand that the love of a mother, that the protection of a father, could fade so quickly when faced with the harsh reality of survival? How could she understand that her worth was now defined not by her laughter, not by her dreams, but by the sum of money that had been paid for her? She wanted to scream. She wanted to run out of the house and never look back. But the fear, the overwhelming fear, kept her rooted to the spot. She was a child, a young girl with no power, no voice. Her destiny had been sealed, and the man who had purchased her was already on his way. As the door creaked open, a cold gust of wind blew through the room, carrying with it the scent of the unfamiliar. A black limousine rolled to a stop in front of the house, its tinted windows reflecting the dull morning light. The man who had purchased her stepped out, tall and imposing, his presence commanding the air around him. He wore a sharp suit, his face hidden behind dark sunglasses, his expression unreadable. He was a man who seemed to have everything, everything except a soul. In that moment, Joy understood what was happening. Her life was no longer her own. She had been sold to this man, a billionaire, a man who had the power to make her life a gilded cage or a prison. The reality of her situation settled over her like a heavy blanket, suffocating her. Her mother's soft cries echoed in the background, but Joy couldn't bring herself to move. Her father's voice, deep and commanding, gave her no choice. "Go with him, Joy. It's for your future. It's for the future of this family. We've made our choice." Joy's heart shattered as she was led out of the house, away from the only life she had ever known. The weight of her parents' decision hung over her like a storm cloud, and as the limousine doors slammed shut, she knew that there would be no going back. The journey ahead was one of uncertainty, of fear, and of the unknown. She was being taken to a world far beyond the reach of her imagination, a world of wealth, power, and control, but also a world where she was nothing more than a possession, a tool to be used. In the coming days, weeks, and months, Joy would learn that nothing is ever as simple as it seems, and that even in a world of luxury, the price of freedom is sometimes the highest cost of all. The journey in the limousine seemed like an eternity. Joy sat in the back seat, her hands gripping her knees, her body trembling despite the plush leather of the seat beneath her. She had never been so far from home, so far from the familiar sights and sounds of her village. The hum of the car's engine, the flickering of streetlights outside, the rhythmic beat of the tires against the smooth tarmac, all of it felt like a distant dream, a world she had never imagined. Her mind raced as the car sped further into the unknown. She wanted to close her eyes, to shut out the terrifying reality that was unfolding before her, but the cold air from the open window kept her alert. It was as if the wind itself was taunting her, reminding her that there was no turning back, no escape from what had already been decided. She had been sold. Sold like a commodity. Her parents, the people she trusted most, had handed her over to a stranger for a sum of money that could never buy back what had been lost. Her freedom, her dignity, her very identity. How could they have done this to her? Was the hunger, the poverty, the struggle really worth sacrificing her for? She had always been taught that family meant everything, that love was the foundation of their bond. But what kind of love was this? What kind of parents could do this to their own daughter? Her thoughts were interrupted by the soft hum of a voice, the driver's voice, which was calm and detached. "We are almost there," he said, as though he were simply transporting cargo to its destination. There was no warmth in his words, no comfort. He was a man doing his job, and Joy was just another passenger in his eyes. She turned her gaze out of the window, trying to see anything familiar. She looked for the comfort of the land she had grown up in, the tall trees, the winding paths, the small huts scattered across the horizon. But all she could see now was a blur of tall, cold buildings, concrete streets, and unfamiliar faces rushing past in the opposite direction. This was no longer home. This was a place where the rules were different, where people were driven by wealth and power, where things like love and family took a backseat to status and greed. As the car pulled into a gated estate, the heavy gates opened silently, almost ominously, to reveal a mansion like nothing Joy had ever seen. The compound was vast, the grounds manicured, the house towering with walls made of glass and stone. It was a fortress, a kingdom, and she was about to become its prisoner. The car came to a slow stop in front of the entrance. The driver did not wait for her to gather her thoughts, he opened the door for her, his movements mechanical, as though he were doing nothing more than delivering a package. Joy hesitated for a moment, her heart pounding in her chest. The fear inside her was suffocating, a heavy weight pressing down on her chest. Her mind screamed at her to run, to fight, to scream for help, but her legs were like stone, frozen in place. What could she do? She was alone, far from everything she had ever known. She stepped out of the car, her bare feet meeting the cold marble floor of the entrance hall. The sharp contrast between the warmth of the car and the chill of the mansion sent a shiver through her body. The tall, grand doors of the mansion swung open, revealing the figure who would be her master, the man who had purchased her, an imposing figure with cold eyes and a presence that seemed to dominate the space around him. He was taller than anyone she had ever seen, with sharp features and a face that held no warmth. His eyes, hidden behind dark sunglasses, gave nothing away. He had the aura of someone who was used to getting what he wanted, a man who never had to ask for anything, because he could simply pay for it. His voice, when it finally came, was deep and commanding. "Welcome to my home. You will be well taken care of here." But the words fell flat, empty in their meaning. There was no kindness, no understanding in his voice. It was as though he were simply acknowledging an agreement that had been made, a transaction that had been completed. Joy's throat tightened, and she forced herself to speak, though the words felt like they were being ripped from her. "I want to go home," she whispered, barely audible. It was the only thing she could think to say, the only thing that made sense in the chaos swirling inside her. But the billionaire, whose name she still did not know, merely smiled, a cold, empty smile. "Home," he repeated, as though the concept of home was foreign to him. "You are home now." And with that, he turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing in the grand hall, leaving Joy standing there, alone and trembling. She wanted to scream, to run, to wake up from this nightmare, but she knew there was no escaping now. Her life, as she had known it, was gone. In its place was this luxurious prison, a world where her value was reduced to nothing more than the price someone had been willing to pay. As she was escorted deeper into the mansion, she tried to hold on to the hope that somehow, some way, she could escape this fate. But deep down, she knew that the road ahead would be long and fraught with challenges. She had been brought here under false pretenses, promised a future of comfort and wealth. But as the days passed, she would begin to realize that there was no amount of money that could ever fill the emptiness she felt inside. There was no luxury that could replace the feeling of being loved, of being free. The days that followed felt like an endless blur, each one merging into the next. Joy had been moved into a room far larger than the one she had grown up in, with its velvet curtains and polished floors, the bed draped in rich fabrics that shimmered in the soft light of the chandeliers. The room itself felt like a gilded cage, beautiful yet suffocating, a reminder of the life she had been thrust into. She had expected that with wealth would come comfort, but nothing had prepared her for the isolation that now consumed her every waking moment. The mansion, despite its grandeur, was eerily silent. The few staff members who passed through the corridors avoided her gaze, their eyes downcast as they carried out their tasks with mechanical precision. They had been trained to serve, not to speak, not to acknowledge her as anything more than another object in the billionaire's collection. Each day was the same, endless hours of solitude. The billionaire, whose name was now known to her as Mr. Nwosu, rarely spoke to her. He would come and go at his own leisure, his business matters always keeping him occupied. His presence was almost ghost-like, he was there but not really there, a shadow in the halls, a figure of power whose world was built on money and control. Joy's thoughts became a constant whirlwind as she tried to make sense of it all. She longed for the sounds of her village, the laughter of children playing, the warm greetings from the elderly, the hum of daily life. But here, there was none of that. Here, there was only silence, the kind that makes you question your worth, your place in the world. The only sound she could hear was the thumping of her own heartbeat, the pounding rhythm of her desperation. As the days passed, she found herself growing weaker, not from hunger, for the food was plentiful, but from the emotional toll of her isolation. Her mind had begun to play tricks on her. She would hear voices in the walls, whispering her name, calling her back home, but when she would open the door to investigate, there was only the cold, empty hallway. The walls of the mansion, despite their beauty, felt like they were closing in on her. She began to wonder if this place was even real or if she had been swallowed up by a nightmare that she could not escape. She couldn't help but think about her parents. How could they have done this to her? They had sold her to this man, this stranger. The betrayal cut deeper than any wound she had ever felt. One day, as she wandered the sprawling grounds, she caught sight of a woman walking towards her. The woman was tall and regal, her clothes elegant but understated. She wore no jewelry, no flashy adornments, yet she radiated an undeniable presence. She had an air of quiet dignity about her, and for the first time since arriving, Joy felt a flicker of curiosity. The woman stopped before her, her eyes soft but knowing, as though she could see straight into Joy's heart. "You must be the new one," the woman said, her voice calm yet warm, in stark contrast to the cold atmosphere that surrounded the mansion. "I see them bring you in every day, like a lamb to slaughter. Tell me, do you know why you are here?" Joy felt a rush of emotions. She had never been spoken to like this, not since she had arrived. The woman was not a servant, and she didn't seem to be afraid of Mr. Nwosu. For a brief moment, Joy felt like she might be able to speak her mind, but the words caught in her throat. Instead, she just nodded, unsure of what to say. The woman smiled faintly. "I've been here longer than I care to admit. I, too, was brought here once, for reasons not unlike yours. But in time, I realized that you are not just a possession, not just a means to an end. You are more than that. You have a choice, even here, even now. You just need to understand it." Joy blinked, the words sinking in slowly. A choice? How could she have a choice? She had been sold. She had been bought. How could anyone in her position have the power to choose anything? But the woman continued, her voice lower now, as though sharing a secret. "You see, the key to surviving in this place, to finding your way out, lies in your mind, not in your body. Your body may be his to command, but your mind, your spirit, that is yours alone. Never forget that." The woman's words lingered in the air long after she had gone, and for the first time, Joy felt a spark of hope. Perhaps there was more to her life than this mansion, more to her than what Mr. Nwosu had paid for. Perhaps, just perhaps, she could find a way to reclaim what had been stolen from her. The next few days were spent in contemplation. Joy started to notice small things she hadn't seen before, the way the staff interacted with her, the brief flickers of pity in their eyes when they thought she wasn't looking, the secretive glances exchanged behind her back. There was a world inside the mansion that she didn't understand, but slowly, she began to see the cracks in the walls that had been built around her. One evening, as she stood by the window looking out at the stars, the cold wind brushing against her face, she realized something crucial. She could not keep waiting for someone else to rescue her. She had to take control of her own fate, even if it meant doing something she never thought she would. It was clear now, this was not just about survival anymore. This was about reclaiming her identity, her voice, her power. And as she stared into the night sky, a plan began to form in her mind, one that could either free her or destroy her. But either way, she would no longer remain a prisoner, trapped in a gilded cage of her own making. The mansion had become a labyrinth of silence, a place where time seemed to stand still, yet the pressure of every moment weighed heavily on Joy's chest. The days stretched on, one indistinguishable from the next, and the walls seemed to press in closer with every passing hour. But inside her, something was changing. It wasn't immediately noticeable, not in the way one might expect a sudden burst of courage or clarity. It was more subtle, like a slow rising tide, at first barely noticeable, but powerful enough to eventually reshape everything in its path. It was late one evening when Joy decided she could no longer simply exist in this space. She had been walking the grounds for hours, her mind filled with 100 different thoughts, none of them comforting, none of them offering answers. The night had fallen quietly, with only the soft rustling of the trees and the occasional chirp of crickets to break the silence. As she walked, she found herself standing once more at the edge of the estate, where the tall gates loomed ominously before her. The gates were tall, wrought iron and unyielding. They were the physical barrier between her and the world outside, between her and freedom. For a brief moment, she let herself imagine what it would be like to cross those gates, to step beyond the boundaries of this gilded cage. She imagined running, her feet pounding the earth beneath her, the wind in her hair, the freedom of choice in her heart. But then, reality set in like a cold wave crashing over her. The guards at the gates would stop her. The staff would report her. And Mr. Nwosu would find her, bringing her back to the mansion with a punishment that she could never bear. But as she stood there, staring at the cold iron, something inside her shifted. A thought entered her mind. A dangerous thought that had been planted there by the woman she had met days before. The idea that she wasn't completely powerless, that her body might be controlled, but her mind and her spirit were still hers. She didn't have to wait for permission. She didn't have to wait for someone to come and rescue her. She could make her own path, step by step. The realization came as a quiet yet powerful whisper in her mind, there is always a way out. Even in the darkest situations, there are always cracks in the walls. You just need to find them, and then you need to have the courage to step through them. The next morning, as she walked through the mansion's halls, Joy began to take note of things she had overlooked in the past. The old servants, who were bound to the mansion like ghosts. Each of them had their own small secrets, their own small rebellions, and she began to wonder if perhaps they could be of help. The gardener, who always seemed to linger near the back gates. The housekeeper, who had a soft spot for joy and occasionally smiled in a way that made her feel seen. The driver, whose eyes held a trace of sympathy whenever he drove her around the estate. They were all pieces of a larger puzzle, and Joy had started to see the shape of that puzzle more clearly. There were moments when Mr. Nwosu would come by to check on her, but they were brief, fleeting encounters where he would offer her luxurious gifts, promising her a life of comfort and luxury, but never truly engaging with her as a person. It was a cold, transactional relationship, one that she had no intention of letting define her existence. Each time he walked away, a small part of her grew stronger, more resolute in her belief that she could no longer remain a passive observer in her own life. As the days passed, Joy began to learn more about the mansion, more about the people who worked there. She started to build subtle connections, carefully listening to the conversations around her, learning the rhythms of the estate, understanding the routines of the staff. In a place where everyone was on edge, where the slightest mistake could result in a reprimand, she knew she had to be patient. She couldn't rush things. She had to build trust, slowly, piece by piece. One evening, as she found herself once more in the garden, gazing up at the stars, she thought of her family. She thought of her parents, her mother, Uzoamako, who had held her so tenderly as a child, and her father, Chijioke, who had promised to always protect her. Their faces, so full of love and pain, were etched in her memory. They were the reason she had to find a way out. For them, for herself, for the promise of a life where she could be free. As the stars twinkled above, she found herself recalling the stories her grandmother used to tell her when she was younger. The tales of women who fought for their families, for their homes, and for their freedom. Women who stood strong in the face of adversity, who refused to bow to forces larger than themselves. It was those stories, those legends of resilience and bravery, that gave her strength in this moment. She was not the first to face such darkness, and she wouldn't be the last. But she would be the one to find her way out. Days turned into weeks, and Joy's plan began to take shape. She spent her time learning the layout of the mansion, identifying the weaknesses in security, finding the quiet places where she could slip away unnoticed. But it wasn't just about escape, it was about regaining control over her own life, about claiming her voice back from the place where it had been stolen. She had spent so long being told what to do, being told that her worth was tied to the wealth of another, that her own dreams had become distant echoes, fading more and more each day. But now, as she mapped out her plan, she felt something inside her stir, something powerful, something untouchable. It was her spirit, her determination, her refusal to be reduced to nothing but a transaction. The mansion, with all its grandeur and wealth, had become the prison of her past. But her future was still hers to claim. She would find a way to escape, to reclaim her freedom, and she would do it on her own terms. It was not going to be easy, and she would face countless obstacles along the way, but as long as she held on to her strength, her mind, and her heart, she knew she would find a way out. The mansion had once seemed like a fortress, an imposing symbol of power and control, but as the weeks passed, Joy began to see it differently. The grand walls, the towering gates, the servants and guards, they were not invincible. They were human. And humans, no matter how powerful, always had weaknesses. She was learning this, step by step, day by day. It started with small acts of defiance. Nothing overt, nothing that would draw too much attention. A missing item here, a rearranged piece of furniture there. A casual question to the servants that seemed innocent enough, but was in reality designed to glean information. Who lived in the East Wing? How many guards were on duty at night? What time did Mr. Nwosu usually leave the mansion for his business trips? At first, the servants didn't pay much attention to her. They were used to people of her status being silent, obedient. But slowly, they began to notice her. She was different now. The girl who had once been terrified and passive, the one who had been brought into the mansion like a lamb to slaughter, had transformed into someone who wasn't afraid to speak, to question, to observe. One evening, as Joy sat alone in the library, carefully going over the bookshelves and pretending to read, the housekeeper, a woman named Mama Ifeoma, came in to tidy up. Mama Ifeoma had been the first one to show her kindness in this cold, soulless place. She had seen the sadness in Joy's eyes and had offered her a quiet smile, a gesture of solidarity that none of the others had extended. "Joy," she said quietly, not meeting her gaze, but speaking in a tone that suggested she knew exactly what was going on. "You've been here a while now, haven't you? You're starting to change, girl. But you must be careful. Not everyone here wants to see you succeed." Joy looked up from the book she had been pretending to read. Her heart skipped a beat, but she kept her voice steady. "What do you mean?" Mama Ifeoma's eyes flickered with something, concern, perhaps, or fear. She set down the cleaning cloth and looked at Joy directly, her expression grave. "This place, it doesn't take kindly to those who try to leave it. The people who work here, they all have their stories. Many came here hoping for a better life, and what they found was something much darker. Don't let your spirit be broken like theirs." Joy didn't speak immediately, but she felt a strange sense of comfort in Mama Ifeoma's words. She was warning her. She was telling her that she wasn't alone, that there were others who had fought in their own way. The woman wasn't offering a solution, but she was planting a seed of hope, something Joy had been desperately searching for since she had first stepped foot in this place. "I know what I need to do," Joy said, her voice stronger than it had ever been. The word surprised even her, but in that moment, something clicked. She could do this. She could escape. Over the next few days, Joy began to take her interactions with the staff to the next level. She wasn't going to escape on her own, she knew that. She needed allies, people who knew the mansion, who understood its rhythm. People who could help her slip through the cracks. And Mama Ifeoma, as careful as she was just the beginning. The gardener, Obinna, was another person who seemed to take an interest in her. He would sometimes stop and chat with her as she wandered the grounds. He had a quiet wisdom about him, an understanding of the world that had long since passed into the hands of men like Mr. Nwosu. One afternoon, as Joy was resting in a secluded part of the garden, Obinna approached her. "Joy," he said, his voice low and careful, "you need to be careful. The master is a powerful man. But not even the strongest men can control everything. If you want to leave this place, you need to know when to act, when to wait." Joy looked up at him, startled. "You know." He nodded once. "I've seen the way you look at the gates, the way you watch the road. I've been here long enough to know when someone wants out." For a moment, they were both silent. Joy could feel the weight of his words settling on her, the gravity of what he was offering her. "How can I trust you?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. Obinna smiled, but it was a sad, knowing smile. "You don't have to trust me. You only need to trust yourself. The rest will follow." Those words were enough. From that moment on, Joy and Obinna exchanged quiet words and subtle glances whenever they crossed paths. He never directly assisted her, there was too much risk in that, but he gave her small pieces of knowledge, told her what to look out for, what to avoid. Every little detail helped. And then, there was the driver, Namdi, who had driven Joy to the mansion when she first arrived. He had been one of the first people to show any kind of emotion toward her, his eyes soft with pity as he glanced at her in the rearview mirror. Now, as she spent more time observing him, she noticed that he wasn't as cold as the other staff members. There was something more to him, something hidden beneath the surface. She wasn't sure if she could trust him yet, but he was another piece in her growing web of connections. One evening, she took a deep breath and made her decision. She was going to test the waters, to see how far her newfound strength could take her. It was time to see if she could gather enough allies to make her escape a reality. That night, as she walked through the halls of the mansion, past the grand portraits of Mr. Nwosu's ancestors, she made her way to the back kitchen. There, she found the housekeeper, Mama Ifeoma, washing dishes in the dim light. "I'm ready," Joy said, her voice steady. "I need you to help me." Mama Ifeoma paused, her hands frozen in the soapy water. She turned to face Joy, her eyes soft but guarded. For a moment, it seemed as if she might refuse, but then she sighed deeply. "I don't know what you plan to do, Joy," she said softly, "but if you want to leave, if you truly want to escape, I'll do whatever I can to help. But be warned, you may lose everything. Not just this place, but everything you thought you knew. There's no going back once you start down this path." Joy nodded, her heart pounding, but her resolve was clearer than ever. "I know. But I can't stay here. Not like this." Mama Ifeoma smiled faintly, as if understanding that Joy had made her choice. "Then we'll make a plan. But remember this, freedom comes at a cost. It always does." The mansion, with its high ceilings and endless corridors, had always felt like a place of constant surveillance, a place where every step, every word, was noted and accounted for. But now, as Joy moved quietly through its halls, she felt an unusual sense of agency. It wasn't much, just the smallest shift, a flicker of power, but it was enough to push her forward. The mansion, which once felt like a prison, now felt like a place with cracks, a place where secrets could be hidden and where the right words, the right moves, could lead to freedom. It had been a week since she spoke to Mama Ifeoma, and since then, she had been carefully laying the groundwork for her escape. Every interaction, every moment of her day had become part of her plan. She had learned the schedules of the guards, memorized the paths the staff took, and even paid attention to the most mundane details, like when the mansion's gates were most often left open, even for a brief moment. The more she observed, the more she realized that the mansion, for all its grandeur and wealth, had its own vulnerabilities. Vulnerabilities she could exploit if she moved carefully. But with each passing day, the weight of the plan began to settle heavier on her shoulders. She had never thought of herself as someone who could make such a dangerous move. The idea of running from the mansion, of leaving everything behind, was overwhelming, even terrifying. But the more she thought about it, the more she understood that she had no choice. Staying here, in this gilded cage, would mean losing herself entirely. She could not allow herself to become just another possession, another object to be bought and sold. On one particularly quiet afternoon, as Joy was walking through the garden, she found herself drawn to the small corner of the estate where the wildflowers grew. It was a spot she had discovered by accident, tucked away behind some hedges, a place that seemed untouched by the wealth and power of the mansion. Here, the earth was still raw and alive, the flowers growing in wild abandon, a stark contrast to the sterile order of the mansion. For a brief moment, Joy allowed herself to breathe in the fresh air, the scent of the flowers filling her lungs. It was the first time in weeks that she didn't feel like someone was watching her, measuring her every move. But the peace was short-lived. From the corner of her eye, she saw a familiar figure walking toward her, the billionaire himself, Mr. Nwosu. The sight of him made her heart race, but she quickly forced herself to regain her composure. She couldn't afford to be weak now, not when she had come so far. He stopped before her, his cold eyes scanning her face with a detached interest. "I see you found your little haven," he said, his voice as icy as ever. "I trust you're comfortable here. I've provided you with everything you could ever need. What more could you possibly want?" Joy stood up straighter, the moment of peace evaporating into the oppressive atmosphere of his presence. She kept her voice calm, even though her heart was beating faster with each passing second. "I'm fine, thank you." There was a brief pause as Mr. Nwosu took a step closer to her, his eyes narrowing. "You should be grateful, you know. Not everyone gets this kind of life. Most people would kill for what you have here. But you're ungrateful." Joy bit back the words that threatened to spill from her mouth. It wasn't worth it. Instead, she looked at him and nodded once. "I understand. But in that moment, something inside her shifted. She wasn't going to be intimidated by him any longer. He was just a man, one who had bought her, yes, but that didn't mean he owned her soul. Her mind, her heart, those were still hers. And she would fight to keep them, no matter what it cost. Mr. Nwosu didn't seem to notice the shift in her demeanor. He turned on his heel, his back stiff and rigid, and walked away without another word. But Joy didn't move, didn't look away. She stood there, watching him leave, and for the first time, she felt something she hadn't in a long time, a glimmer of defiance. The next few days were a blur of preparations. The window of opportunity for her escape was small. The mansion had a strict routine, and she knew that any attempt to leave during the day would be risky. The guards were always alert, always watching. But the night was different. At night, the mansion became a different world. The staff went to bed. Mr. Nwosu often left for business trips, leaving the estate in the hands of a few remaining staff. The gates, too, were sometimes left less guarded. She had observed everything, and now it was time to act. That night, as the mansion settled into its usual quiet, Joy slipped out of her room, dressed in dark clothes that would blend in with the night. Her heart was pounding in her chest, the adrenaline coursing through her veins. She had never done anything like this before, never taken a risk so dangerous, but she was ready. This was her chance, and she couldn't let it slip away. She moved quickly, silently, through the mansion's halls. The guards, as she had predicted, were gathered in the far corners of the estate, talking and laughing, their attention elsewhere. She passed them without a sound, her every step calculated, her breath steady. When she reached the back of the estate, she found the gardener's tool shed where Obinna had told her to meet him. He was already there, waiting for her. He didn't speak, but his nod was enough. He handed her a small key, a key to the side gate, the one that was often left unguarded after hours. "You'll need this," he whispered, his voice low. "The gate's old. It's easy to get through if you're quick." Joy nodded, her hands trembling slightly as she took the key. It was happening. It was finally happening. The gate loomed in front of her, the cold iron bars stretching high into the night sky. The lock was old, rusted, and with a twist of the key, it gave way, the heavy door creaking open just enough for her to slip through. She looked back one last time at the mansion, the place that had both imprisoned her and given her the wealth she had never asked for. And then, she stepped through. The world beyond the gates was dark, quiet, and unfamiliar, but it was hers. It was freedom. End of part 1. Part 2 coming soon. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on your notifications bell, also comment where you are watching from. Thank you.